Uh, Good morning, dear friends and colleagues in Germany, and good afternoon, dear colleagues and friends in China. So my name is Wang Jianbao. Yeah, I'm very glad to host this event. This is a spiritual humanism online seminar, and this is 11th event. It's a series academic events since 2020. We try to work together to study spiritual humanism versus secular humanism to find out the some potential overlap at the restless horizon between among the axial age civilizations and other indigenous civilizations as well, to seek harmony of our human being life. So this is the Institute for the Advanced Humanistic Studies at Peking University, as well as World ESIC Institute, Beijing, WEIB. It was established in 2012 at the Peking University. I'm also a research fellow from Hong Kong Graduate School of Business, CKGSB. So today it's my big honor to invite Professor Karl Heinz POHL to chair this seminar and to give us a wonderful speech. His speech title is Basics of Chinese Aesthetics, its philosophical and cross-cultural frame of reference. Professor Karl Heinz POHL is from Trier University, Universität Trier. Trier city is the home city of Karl Marx. So we are also very happy for this. He was born in 1945 in St. Louis, Germany, PhD in East Asian Studies from the University of Toronto, 1982. From 1987 to 1992, Professor of Chinese Literature and History of Ideas at the Tübingen University, Germany. From 1992 to 2010, Professor POHL is Chair of Chinese Studies and Dean of Humanities at the Trier University, Germany. The fields of research of Professor Karl Heinz POHL is Chinese history of ideas, literature and literary theory, ethics and aesthetics of modern and pre-modern China, in intercultural communication and dialogue between China and the West. Professor POHL is specialized in the research of Zheng Banqiao. He had a great book, Poet, Painter, and Calligraph in 1990, as well as aesthetics and literary theory in China from tradition to modernity, 2006. I don't want to take too much time of this introduction, since the speech will be very wonderful with rich content. So I will let Professor Karl Heinz POHL to share his great ideas with us. By the way, Professor POHL is also the translator of The Path of Beauty by Professor Li Zehou, is the most famous book in 1980s for the complete one generation Chinese in that time. It's kind of enlightenment for that generation Chinese. That's a great translation. So Professor POHL, is that your turn to deliver your speech to us?
Yes.
Welcome again. Thank you very much. Yeah, you can share your screen.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And I feel very honored to be invited by your institution to give this lecture. I know about the the place of your institution, for that women, all this effort, and so I feel truly honored. And speaking in at Beijing, 我应该用中文讲几句话。不过我的中文
First of all, I want to say a few words in Mandarin, but my Mandarin or Putonghua is not that good. You know that most of the sinologists has Chinese wives, but I do not have a Chinese wife. My wife is from Canada. And there are also advantages of having a Canadian wife because my English can be good. So now I will speak in English. Then, but maybe in the future, on other occasions, I can talk in English.
Okay, let's just begin. So I will talk about the basics of Chinese aesthetics. I will discuss the philosophical background and some cross-cultural problems with it too. Here is the content of my speech. I will first of all talk about Chinese aesthetics as a philosophical discipline. I talk a little bit about aesthetic potential of Chinese language, yin-yang thought, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, and then in the end about aesthetics in modern China with some concluding remarks. So first of all, let's talk about aesthetics as a philosophy or also as an epistemic discipline. As you all know, the sciences and humanities at universities, they're all set up by Western academics. They have become, though, systems with a universal, or one should say, a global significance. All over the globe, we are doing studies of sciences and humanities according to the setup of Western academics. But since this is so, since sciences and humanities are a European invention, we are inclined everywhere to define concepts and categories on the basis of a specific European tradition, according to European, by now also, of course, also to American preferences. But we have to stress that aesthetics, according to European criteria, never existed in China. It's a invention of the West. And here we get into the intercultural dimension of our topic. When we deal with phenomena of another culture, we have to be critical. We have to exercise self-reflection because things appear similar, but in fact they are different because there are different contexts, there are different backgrounds. So what we have to do in cross-cultural studies, we have to make the background visible. We have to make the context visible because we're dealing with culture. And I don't want to go into definitions of culture here now, but culture comprises, first of all, the language that we speak. It also comprises the cultural framework of myth and images that we use. The way we refer to literature, art, religion, and philosophy. For example, in China, you would refer quite naturally to sayings of Confucius, or let's say to poems by Du Fu or Li Bai or Su Longpo. We don't here in the West. We have a completely different frame of reference. And this is what we also call the symbolic and aesthetic orientation. That's all part of culture. And this is very crucial to any cultural identity. So when we talk about traditional Chinese aesthetics, I just said before, it never existed aesthetics according to our Western kind of concept. Traditional Chinese aesthetics is, in a way, an invention of Western learning that reached China at the end of the 19th century. And it is, so to speak, a modern perspective on pre-modern Chinese art. when we look at it a little bit more closely, then we can see it as a specific Chinese way of inquiring into the nature of artistic or literary creativity. So traditional Chinese aesthetics, when we see it from this way, it deals with poetry, calligraphy, and painting. According to Li Zihou, this would be the narrow understanding of Chinese aesthetics. If we have a wider understanding of Chinese aesthetics, then we would also deal with architecture, pottery, bronze, music, martial arts, or gardens. But I will not deal with this wider understanding, but only deal with the narrow understanding of Chinese aesthetics. So when we talk about poetry, calligraphy, and painting, and also architecture, gardens, or whatever, it is impossible to find common traits to all of these disciplines. But poetry, calligraphy, and painting, as the most prominent scholarly arts, they do share some common traits. And for this reason, that will be the background of my talk. Important is also to look at the texts on aesthetics. How do they differ in the West from those in the East in China? In the European tradition, the texts on aesthetics are based on works by Plato and Aristotle. So we have rather systematic discussions on the concept of mostly beauty. In the modern period that started in the 18th century with a German fellow, his name is Baumgarten, was taken up by Kant and also by Schiller. These are scholars that you might know in China too by now. In China, on the other hand, the texts on aesthetics were not systematic discussions, and also not on the concept of beauty. You had unsystematic writings. Instead, we have writings that probe into the essence of artistic expression, artistic creativity, and often done through the medium of poetry. So the texts on aesthetics in China are often poems about poetry and art. And so this is quite different from the European tradition. So to quote Shakespeare, I will now teach you differences. Yeah, we'll see a little bit, we'll highlight the differences. First of all, let's look at the concept of beauty in Confucianism. In the Confucian discourse on literature and art, there is no discussion on beauty. Beauty, the way we understand it in the West, is considered to be external decor. It is less valuable than moral content. And you even have the notion that beauty in literature and art is something like vulgar, like su, in Chinese. So you have somewhat a negative connotation to the concept of beauty or beautiful, like to Mei, but also to synonyms like Hua, Li, and Yan, and whatever. In the early Confucian texts, we have a way of equivalent of beautiful with good, like Mei and Shan, that we see in some early texts. And it is interesting that we also find this in ancient Greece, that beautiful is equivalent to good. And Dr. Wang Jianbao, he brought my attention to a quotation from Mengzi, where you have like the concepts of good, of trustworthy, beautiful, great, sage, and spirit all brought up in a row, Shan, Qin, Mei, Da, and Sheng, and Shen. And here you see the context of beautiful, like in the old text, it is something like good. What about in Taoism? And here, let's quote the second chapter of the Tao Te Ching. 天下皆美之为美，恶意。All in the world know the beauty of the beautiful, and in doing this, they have the idea of what ugliness is. Yeah? So beauty and ugliness are connected in relativity. Neither one of them is to be preferred. Now, I will only briefly touch upon the linguistic roots of Chinese aesthetics, but you know that the Chinese writing, from its origins, are pictographs and are ideographs. So we have pictorial aspects in Chinese writings. You have images in Chinese writing, and then you also have semantic openness in philosophical texts. That philosophical texts, even like monks or Lunyu and Confucian texts, they speak through images. This is what we don't have like that in the West. And you also have in the Chinese language, you have, because of linguistic features, you have a tendency to form parallel structures like 对称, you know. And here I quote a famous American Chinese scholar, Fang Zhetong. He said that parallelism is ingrained in Chinese thinking. So this is something that is so much internalized that you find it all over the place. And here only to give you an example of a 对联 by Zhang Banqiao, like Wang Jianbao, he mentioned I studied Zhang Banqiao. But you have one of the origins of this tendency to form parallel structures is our linguistic features, but the other origin is the yin-yang thought, yin-yang shuo or yin-yang sixiang. It is a mode of perception of the world, always to seek balance, to consider things in context, not in isolation. So put them always in binary oppositions, and to harmonize these binary oppositions. That's important. And this thought was, of course, influenced by the Book of Changes, by the I Ching or Zhou Yi, that you always see complementary relationships, that you see the unity of opposites according to the yin-yang patterns. When you have hard, you match it with soft, you know, gang and rou, raw. And mountains had to be matched with water. Fullness was emptiness, feeling with seeing, idea with setting, self and world, and so on. So always unite these binary opposites. Now, what about Confucianism and Chinese aesthetics? There are, according to my view, there are two major topics. First of all, it has also to do with the yin-yang thought. You have a tendency towards balance or harmony. And a second great topic is art and morality. What about the first, the tendency towards balance and harmony? Very, very important in Chinese thought is the way of the mean, 中庸之道. So this in literature, in art, this means that we seek harmony of form and content. Like in Chinese, like the 文质彬彬, 文 and 质, like form and content have to be matched. This is not only so in the performance of rites, but also in literature. And the second goal is to have cultivated expression, 文雅. So 文雅的表达. And so for this reason, we find aesthetic topics in Confucian texts on rites and music. The music chapter in the Book of Rites, you know, the 礼记中的那个乐体, this is like the richest source for discussions on of aesthetic topics in the Confucian tradition. And so it is interesting that Li Ziho, he also calls China or the Chinese culture, the culture of rites and music. 中国就是礼乐者文化。And the second topic, like the connection of art and morality, I will try to illustrate that with certain sentences that the Chinese all know, and that kind of illustrate this important connection. In the Chinese tradition, literature and art was always seen as a reflection of the character of the poet or of the artist. Like you have the saying, 诗如其人 or 书如其人, 画如其人. So it's art and literature is a reflection of the moral makeup of the person who created this art. And this is also connected with the second topic, that literature and art is a reflection of the vital power of the artist or the poet, you know, 文以气为主. Then in the earliest writings on poetry in China, in the Book of Songs, you have the idea that poetry is a way of expressing moral intent, you know, 诗言志. So this shows also the connection of art and morality. And last but not least, particularly from the Song dynasty on, like with the Song Ming Neo-Confucian thinkers like Zhu Xi and such, the Cheng Yi, Cheng Hao, you have the idea that literature had to express the moral way, you know, 文以载道. So these notions all became very, very influential in the course of Chinese history. But to my view, like the connection between Taoism and Chinese aesthetics is a lot more important, a lot more fruitful in a way. Of course, the connection between Confucianism and aesthetics is important as well, but the Chinese themselves have kind of dwelt more on this on those Taoist issues. And what are the topics in Taoism that are important for Chinese aesthetics? First of all, there is a certain language skepticism that led to a poetic expression through images and allegory. A second topic is that great art was kind of artless art. Third topic is that circles around the essence of artistic creativity. And a fourth topic is the notion of kung fu, the notion of practice and perfection. And I will deal with these four issues now in the next few slides. So first of all, the issue of language skepticism. You all know the beginning of the Tao Te Ching, you know, 道可道，非常道. The way that can be talked about is not the permanent way. So it is also matched by saying in the Book of Changes and the I Ching that language cannot exhaust idea. 言不尽意. And the sages, they set up images in order to exhaust idea. And what are the consequences out of this language skepticism? The consequences is that it's better to speak in images and parables. Such as Zhuangzi. Zhuangzi said, of my sentences, 9 in 10 are metaphorical. You know, 语言诗酒. And also not only speaking in images and parables, but also speaking in paradoxes. So when you speak in paradoxes, then truth is in a way the same as non-truth. method as non-method. So you don't get clear-cut ideas, but you get these paradoxes. And in the end, you also get a tendency to not to say anything anymore, to silence, or to say the unsayable. 道气不可道之. So this is also somewhat comparable to a movement in European history of ideas in the medieval ages, the so-called apophatic theology, or the negative theology, 否定神学. They were also trying to say the unsayable. So poetic expressions, they were, that was done through images. The images are supposed to be a stronger way of expression than discursive speech. So images and metaphors express things not explicitly, but implicitly, indirectly. This is the poetic expressions through images, and in a way of indirect expression, by way of allegory, by analogy. The analogy that you find in the traditional Chinese poetics was that the world of nature is, in a way, equivalent to the world of man. So you could use images of nature in order to express human emotions. So this is the major feature of Chinese poetry. And the technical term of this Chinese poetics, that you don't say things explicitly but implicitly, that's 含蓄. And in Sidong Paul's 24诗篇, the 24 qualities of poetry, you have a little poem on 含蓄, and this is only I think a third of it, but gives you an idea of what he wants to say. In the English translation, it says, without writing a single word, get all the spirit and charm. Without speaking of one's misery, a passionate sadness comes through. 不着一字，今得风流. So in second two, he deals some more with the topic of implicitness in poetry. Important, according to his poetics, is the meaning beyond words. 言外之意. This is what I call suggestiveness, with an English term, 暗示性. It's another way of indirect expressions. So Sekong Tu, he uses some phrases to illustrate this suggestiveness, this meaning beyond words. He has the phrase images beyond images, 相外之相. He has the phrase scenes beyond scenes, 境外之境. But this not only affects poetry, but also painting. In painting, you have the notion of writing of ideas. So you don't want to depict reality as in the Western tradition. You want to write the ideas behind it. It's already similar to the modern Western abstract painting. And just in the same way as Sekong Tu, you have in the 18th century, Chinese scholar's name was Huang Yue. He wrote 24 qualities of paintings, 24画篇, just like Sekong Tu 24诗篇. And there you have the saying, the marvelous quality is beyond the painted image. 妙在画外. So just like with Sekong Tu, like 言外之意, or 向外之相, and such on, you have here 妙在画外. So a certain beyondness. This is what I call suggestiveness. Second topic is artless art. So we had before the beginning of the Tao Te Ching, like Dao Ke Dao, Bu Chang Dao. So the way the Tao is unspeakable. What we can get is only approximations to the Tao. We can only have ideas about it that approximate it. And one approximation is that the Tao is by itself so, it's Ziran. Another way of approximate the Tao is that the Tao works by not doing by not doing, not steering the course of things. So when we apply these two notions to the concept of art, then we get the idea that unintentional or natural art is of higher value than intentional or artificial art, so to speak. So the Chinese of old stressed something that was like sketchiness, an ability that is beyond technical skills, that is in a way artless, that is spontaneous. And let me illustrate that here was a painting by Bada Chandra. And here you get this sketchiness. And I also show you painting by Picasso. He at one stage in his creative history, he also liked to sketch things like this, like here was the bullfight. And in the Zhuangzi, we have a wonderful passage that illustrates this artless art. This is like the idea about the bell stand carver. Zhuangzi writes here, "Your subject is but a mechanic. What art should I be possessed of? Nevertheless, there is one thing. When your servant had undertaken to make the bell stand, I did not venture to waste any of my power and felt it necessary to fast in order to compose my mind. By this time, everything that could divert my mind from exclusive devotion to the exercise of my skill had disappeared. Then I went into the forest and looked at the natural forms of the trees. When I saw one of a perfect form, then the figure of the bell stand rose up to my view, and I applied my hand to the work. Had I not met with such a tree, I must have abandoned the object. But my heaven-given faculty and the heaven-given qualities of the wood were concentrated on it. So it was that my spirit was thus engaged in the production of the bell stand." 一田和田. That's the important passage here in this piece from Zhuangzi. So to fuse one's nature with the nature of the object and to create out of the unity with the Tao. That way you transcend technical skills and you enter into a mysterious realm, into a realm that's described with the Chinese notion of Shen. So the idea is that a masterpiece comes into being like the work of nature. And this artless art is natural, but it's artistically perfect. Here, I photographed it once, I think in Lijiang in Yunnan, a bell stand. The third topic was essence of artistic creativity. So let's recapitulate. The ideal in Chinese art, in Chinese aesthetics, is to create like the work of nature, to let art be created by itself, to create out of the Tao. Here you get the idea that the artist and the work of art form a unity, and that artistic creativity is located in a mystical, or if not mysterious, realm. And you have three important terms in Chinese aesthetics that describe this mysterious realm. First of all, Shen, There are all sorts of translations to Shen, like originally like a god, yeah, so mysterious, unfathomable, miraculous. Then the second important term is Tian, like heaven, like so natural as if the work had been created by heaven or nature. And the third important topic is Qi, also like spiritual, but also vital power. So the goal is to achieve artistic perfection in a work of art, imbued with vital resonance and with a live movement. Yeah, so qi yun sheng dong. This is the first law of Chinese painting according to Xie He in the 6th century. And as to the unity of artist and the work of art, there is a poem by Su Po about his cousin Wen Tong or Yuke that illustrates this. He writes, when Yuke paints bamboo, he sees only bamboo, no other person. Not only seeing no persons, vacantly and far away, he loses himself. He himself is transformed into bamboo, which endlessly is growing anew. Since Zhuangzi is no longer with us, who understands the spiritual power? Yeah. Qi shen yu zhu hua, wu qiong chu qing xi. And here is the reference to Zhuangzi and to this mysterious notion of Shen. And from Su Po, there's another quotation about his natural creativity. He compared his writing to, quote, 1,000-gallon spring that issues forth without choosing a side. On level ground, it flows abundantly and swiftly and can go 1,000 miles in a day without any trouble. When it twists and winds in the midst of the mountains, its appearance changes with the setting, and there's no knowing how it will take shape. But there's one thing I am sure of. It always goes where it should go, and it stops where it should stop. So you have here a Taoist image of natural creativity, but you also have an idea of what will later be talked about. I will come to it in a second. What living rules are, there is a regularity to it too, which is kind of natural. It goes where it has to go, where it should go, and it stops where it should stop. So here we get to the topic of living rules. A great work of poetry of art is basically a living or organic pattern, not dependent on rules derived from orthodox models. It follows the rules of nature, and these are called, in the Chinese tradition, living rules, contrary to dead rules. Yeah? These works come alive by creating their own rules. And so you have what the famous Chinese painter of the 17th, 18th century, Shi Tao, then comes to the rule of no rule is the ultimate rule. 无法之法，乃为至法。 And here is a painting by Shi Tao that illustrates. Here the inscription says, I think, 日出寒山外，江流苏不中。 Wonderful painting by Shi Tao. And here I want to illustrate this concept of living rules by a quotation from Ye Xie on the cloud patterns on Mount Tai. I find this short little quotation wonderful, and it very much illustrates what Chinese traditional aesthetics is all about. It says, within heaven and earth, the greatest forms of Wen, like not only literature, but just pattern in general, are the wind and clouds, rains and the thunder. Their mutations and transformations cannot be fathomed and have neither limit nor boundary. They are the highest manifestation of spirit in the universe and the perfection of Wen. But let me speak of them from one particular point of view. The clouds of Mount Tai rise from the merest wisp, but before the morning is done, they cover the world. All at once, black clouds will mount upward, and the natives of the region will read the signs by established rule, and they say, it will rain, and it does not rain. Then again, some clouds lit by the sun will come out, and the established rule tells them it's going to be sunny, and then it rains. The attitudes assumed by the clouds can be counted in the tens of thousands. No two are the same. This is the natural pattern of heaven and earth. It is perfect work. 此天地自然之文，之共也。But let us suppose that the pattern of heaven and earth would be set according to a rule. When Mount Tai was going to dispatch its clouds, it would first gather the troops of clouds and hold a conference with them. I am about to send 2 clouds out to make the great pattern of heaven and earth. Now, you over there, I want you to go first, and you follow him. I would like you to rise up, you next to him, you sink down. You should try shining in the light, and you might try making rippling motion. You back there, you should turn around as you go out and come back in. And I think it would be especially nice to have you sort of roll over in the sky. This one is to begin, this one is to close, and this one here is to follow up, the rear wagging its tail. If the clouds were dispatched like this and brought back home like this, there would be no vitality in any of them. And if the pattern of the universe were made in this manner, then the universe would feel burdened by having a Mount Tai. And Mount Tai would feel burdened by having clouds, and no clouds would ever be sent out. So this is the little quote from Ye Xie. I find that quite wonderful. So I hope you like it too. So we have the problem though that when we just spontaneously do art, what we call primitivism, that does not necessarily lead to great art. Student Paul had already this insight, you know, that you also need a certain training, you need skill, you know, not just only natural creativity. Student Paul has this saying, there's Tao and there's skill. If one has Tao and not skill, then although things have been formed in one's mind, they will not take shape through one's hand. You know? 有道有义，有道而不义，自无所以行后信，不行后手。So you need an artistic creativity which kind of enters a realm that is characterized by transcendence of technical skill. Something which is also illustrated in the book of Zhuangzi by Kok Ding, you know, Pao Ding. All the Chinese will probably know what I mean. So you have the goal to fuse naturalness and skill. You need both. You need nature and you need art. Art in terms of technical skill. The question is, how do you get there? How do you get into this realm, you know, where you can transcend technical skill? And here the notion of Gongfu comes in. Gongfu, practice and perfection. So you have to practice constantly. You have to also copy the great masters. That leads to mastery and perfection. That leads to natural creativity, as the book of Zhuangzi illustrates in so many anecdotes. So you have the proverb in Chinese, if your Gongfu is good enough, you can grind an iron bar into a needle. You know, 只有功夫深，接触磨成针. So you have to practice, and then your art becomes natural. Then it becomes just like heaven, you know, 天. And you have anecdotes that illustrates this Gongfu. For example, the Gongfu of Wang Xizhi, the greatest calligraphy of all times. You know, all the Chinese know that he used up a whole pond of water to wash his ink, before he could reach perfection. So this is how much you need to practice. And then here you get the mortar in Shaoxing, and then you can create a work like the Lantingxu. Then it is just natural and perfect at the same time. So the result of Kung Fu is that you have an intuitive mastery of the artistic medium. You can handle it intuitively, and it is always right. It is like second nature.